what better way to support women that are in crisis than getting together and, you know, as friends and colleagues, and saying, okay, let's do something together for women that are struggling. And so that's how it started, supporting the YW and the Sheriff King. And most of the events were held at Brava Bistro. And Dewey was always a super strong supporter of the girls' gathering over the years. And he, for many years, just always stepped up. And his lovely wife, Leah, is on the call tonight. Hi, Leah. It's nice to see you. I'm going to move this poll. There we go, so I can see more faces. So in the early days, the girls' gathering, we moved from delivering gifts into, I'd make a call and say, okay, what's most needed? And at one point, their refrigerator had broken, and so we raised money for a new refrigeration system at the Sheriff King. Another time, it was their commercial dishwashing system, and you can imagine when that breaks down, that wreaks havoc in a. So we collected funds and got a new commercial dishwasher and installed at the Sheriff King. So as time went on, we would just gather funds and then said, well, you can give them to wherever they are most needed. And so the reason that we would do this, I mean, it's really all about you. It's about all of you women that are on the call tonight. It's about women that aren't able to be on the call tonight. It's about your daughters and your mothers. It's about the sisterhood. And so I'm very passionate about that. I come from a line of strong women in my family, and I've been blessed with wonderful, wonderful friends as well, and great support. However, you know, I know that some of us have experienced a crisis in our life. Some of us have supported someone who has been in crisis. And the fact is that 1 in 3 women in her lifetime will experience this. Another poll. Many women have neither the financial resources nor the family and friends for support, and get to a place where the shame and the humility is paralyzing. And it's through programs that the Y offers that women can find their courage, find their strength, and get better, and they can heal. And it helps their children. It can break the cycle of violence through education. And they have programs for men, for boys, for families. And so I greatly admire the work that they do, and it works. And it's something that we need desperately in our community, and which is why we support it. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Jan Damery. And Jan she's the Vice President of External Relations and Engagement. She is a very dynamic woman. She has a real can-do attitude, and she has the energy and the drive for hard work. Jan oversees human resources, government relations, marketing and communications, social enterprises, and fundraising. And Jan, I thank you very much for all of the work that you do to make a difference in the lives of women in our community, and even more so under the pressures and the challenges that have been imposed by this pandemic. So, Jan, welcome.
Thanks, Carol Ann. First order of business for everyone who's got a glass in their hands. Can we please toast our host, Carol
Oh,
Ann? It's an amazing thing to see all of these faces. And thank you, Carol Ann, for bringing us back together again. Just a long history. And I think we're all looking at what we can bring forward to us, but a toast to Carol Ann. And I'm thrilled that we're bringing this forward into whatever our new reality is going to be. So thank you again for everyone for joining us. We are thrilled. I have a number of my colleagues on the call with us. We've tried to identify ourselves by YW Calgary, but also when one says wine, you actually have the full executive team on this call. So want to put a shout out to Sue Tomney, to Leah Bell, as well as Anna Nelson. And then we've got a bunch of people working in the background as well to make this happen. How many of you are sick of Zoom? Give me a thumbs up if you're sick of it. So, much rather be at a cocktail party, real time. So
totally.
we'll look forward to doing that, right? So true. But we're grateful for all of you spending the time, because I'm funny. Most of my days are spent kind of on these virtual calls. Now I usually have nothing left by this time of night, but I'm unusually motivated and energized by this, just seeing all your faces. So thanks again for being with us. One word I'll use to express what's going on with YW right now, and it's called intense. For those of you who have been following our journey, you'll know that we built and moved into our new home last year. And I thought last year was intense. But throw a pandemic into the mix, and I think my colleagues would agree with me, we have never worked harder, mostly because we're dealing with new things every day that hit us. But our primary concern is keeping over 200 women and children who live with us in 5 residential facilities that we operate safe, well, and alive. And I mean that actually all in earnest. Something we've been incredibly proud with, and really the heroes for us are our frontline workers. Because of our new facility and infrastructure, we were able to move a lot of our support teams off-site very quickly. I couldn't have imagined doing it in our old building. How many of you have also been to our old building that we kind of said goodbye to downtown, maybe Fitness on 5th, fondly referred to as the cement bunker? Right? No flexibility, no wiring. And so the fact that we had this beautiful new building to launch during this kind of crisis was truly amazing. And so proud of the team and how we did that. We were up and running almost within a week, having about 120 of our team actually working virtually. And that included counseling, which is really relevant to mental health and what we're going to talk about today. But again, being hyper-focused on those clients, and more importantly, mostly the women that serve our clients. And again, a shout out to our frontline teams. This has been like no other period. Imagine having to build trust with someone who's just faced a traumatic situation, and you have to wear a shield and a face mask. And so it's been really, really challenging. Imagine situations when you've got people who have got symptoms, not feeling well. Our team, we were so proud of them because out of the gate, they sort of assumed that everybody had COVID. But imagine the anxiety that brings into that work environment to make sure people are okay. But how do you help people isolate so they don't actually share the virus with others? And for almost 3 months, we did not have a client who tested positive. Incredibly proud, but we knew the day would come. And that day actually ironically came around June 2nd when we were starting to reopen the economy. And so I know many of us are really optimistic and feeling positive about things opening up, maybe getting back to what we think is a bit normal. But we are hyper aware, and our teams are hyper aware that the virus is still with us, and the populations we serve are highly vulnerable to this virus because they don't have strong immune systems, right? They've had pretty rough lives. Maybe perhaps dealing with substance abuse, under extreme pressure, and we know the impact that has on immune systems. So it's been actually really I would say again, the intensity has increased really for our workers and also our clients. So how do you also continue to de-escalate and make sure people are feeling safe? And of course we do that because we know the window into psychological safety is physical safety. And so what are the cleaning protocols? What is the personal protection equipment? All of this becomes part of our story as we think about too how we continue to walk in this world probably for another couple of years until we've got a vaccine. And also how do we truly at the front line ensure that the women and children we serve are safe. We pivoted also very quickly on a number of our other programs. So something, and we'll start sharing some videos on our social media that you can kind of look at. We're very proud that we're open. We've been actually operating about 80% of our operation, either virtually or in person during this time. But the rally call now, and you're gonna get a theme, frontline workers, because they're starting to get tired. They need a break. And our staffing models are such that we don't have a lot of extra, right, to fill in. And so a lot of our ask and appeals, even as we're now talking to funders, because what we have found during this time, funders typically have liked to fund stuff, right? We'll give you more equipment, we'll give you more cleaning supplies, but no one wants to pay for extra salaries. And so, and that really, when you look at sort of the cost of our operation, about 80% is related to people and their benefits. So that's the plea that we're looking for. And so what this group has already helped us raise, right? Those funds are actually going to go to help reinforce the front line so that we can continue to do this work as the uncertainty and this pandemic continues. I think we've come to appreciate that mental health is the equalizer in all of this. And I think all of us, right? We've felt our wings clipped, right? We've been isolated through this time. And that typically is the situation of many of the women, as you've spoken about, Carol Ann, face and deal with. And so now add a pandemic in, right? So, but I think we're hoping through this time, and it's certainly been shown by the support and the curiosity that people are showing us, that we realize and we have actually empathy for those, right, that are less vulnerable. And there is nothing, in my view, more powerful than a gathering of women to get shit done. So I'm grateful to have all of you here and your supporters, and just grateful for this opportunity. So thank you very much for being with us. And I'll push it back to you, Carol Ann.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now I would like to introduce my dear friend, Dr. Rochelle. She has been a psychologist for 20 years and is an expert in the field of attachment, interpersonal neurobiology, and developmental psychology. She has taught at MRU, at U of C. She spent the last decade working in therapeutic practice with a group of clinicians at Juno House. She has been specializing in working with individuals with anxiety-based issues. And Dr. Rochelle now has her own practice, is offering both virtual and in-person therapy. She's also now consulting for businesses and doing educational presentations. When the pandemic hit, she was quick to respond with an online platform on Instagram in order to help those of us struggling with the uncertainty and doing, our best to manage our anxiety. And you can find her at Dr. Rochelle on Instagram as well. She is committed to making a positive impact on mental health in our communities. I know we will see more of her, and she is a brilliant therapist. She is a steadfast advocate for strong mental health for all. So on that note, Dr. Rochelle.
Thank you very much, Carol Ann. Can you guys all hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you, Carol Ann, for creating this community, this girls gathering community that does such important work. I can't think about how many times over the past few months that I have thought about women and domestic abuse, in particular, how things are being handled, what's happening in our community. And hearing your update, Jan, what is going on at the YW and Sheriff King is really, you know, giving a sense of comfort to our minds, and knowing as well that this group is going to be contributing to more frontline workers, because I can only imagine the burnout that's happening. So that's great. The topic tonight is trauma and resilience. And I think we can think about that as so appropriate with what comes through the doors at the YW, women and children who are experiencing trauma, and with the ultimate goal of transforming that into resilience. As a group tonight, I think we can really be sensitive and aware that what we have gone through collectively and continue to go through is a traumatic event that's happening around our world, and it's impacting us each relative to different degrees. But none of us are unimpacted by what is going around globally. So I'm going to begin with the quote that's up on the screen, that we are more vulnerable than we ever thought, but we are stronger than we ever imagined. And that's from COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg. And who knew 4 months ago that everything would be pulled out from underneath us? So we really, the shock of how vulnerable we really are, of what can change. And hopefully through this, as things hopefully recede shortly, or some signs of it, that we will find that strength as we start to sort of de-thaw and process some of the things that are happening in front of us. So I'm going to begin talking about trauma first, and then go into resiliency. And I have a definition up on the screen of a traumatic experience. So the definition here is a stressful event that shatters your sense of security, making you feel helpless in a dangerous world. Often involves a threat to life or safety, but is any situation that leaves you feeling overwhelmed and isolated. And just taking that definition in, I think it really fits to even what we are going through right now. I also made the distinction between big T trauma and little t trauma. Often we think of trauma as big T, this big acute event, a car accident, an assault, this one-time thing, but I'm going to contrast that with the little t trauma, the more chronic of living in a household where things aren't safe, where there's insecurity of safety and emotional safety. It could be growing up in a household with an alcoholic parent. These sorts of things are chronic, long-term. They're equally as injurious, but we often don't recognize them as such. So they are trauma as well. And it's also can be the presence or the absence of something. So neglect, emotional neglect, is also creating that same traumatic impact. So as we move forward and we look at the next slide, we can talk about psychological trauma symptoms. You can have the exact same trauma experienced by a large number of people, and everyone's going to be impacted differently. Some people will walk away completely symptom-free. Some people have short-term symptoms, and some will be completely flattened and can't get up again without some intervention and support. And I just have the list here. You can take your time to look at it, but I'm just paying attention to the psychological symptoms as well as the physical. And Jan referenced a lot of the physical sense of safety is really important. We also have the physical symptoms. And so the mind and body are definitely connected here and in so many of the other mental health areas. So just moving to the next slide, we're looking at when do these symptoms, if we recognize them in ourselves, when did they start to become something of concern? And I have the quote up there as traumatic symptoms are normal and adaptive responses to an abnormal situation. So when we're under threat for survival, our own safety, our health, we will react defensively, and it can look crazy from the outside. But it actually makes a lot of sense when we look at what we're responding to. However, when the threat abates, and we're actually now in a safe zone, but our body and our minds are reacting as if we're still under threat, that's when we start to have the post-trauma symptoms. So when we talk about something PTSD, the symptoms come after the trauma has ended. That's where we start talking about it, because the threat has subsided. And as we know right now, our threat hasn't subsided. So this is where we're going to start looking at it. It's really actually quite adaptive to still be responding as if we are under threat, because we still are. So we're going to start looking what happens after factor. So when symptoms don't go away and they're interfering with your life and relationships, that's the time to seek professional support. I'm going to say you can start before then. When we're not sleeping, we're having those other symptoms, we need to intervene earlier. But a full-blown, what we refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder, is when the threat has abated. It's no longer real in our present day life where we're acting and responding as if. What determines whether we don't heal and get stuck in that trauma is really determined by what happened before the event and what happens after. We know from the attacks in New York, on 9/11 terrorist attacks, that what determined who got PTSD and who didn't wasn't necessarily the proximity to ground zero or whether you had lost somebody. It really was whether you had had previous trauma before. So it's like the wound and the scab has been removed and it's exposed again, and it's going to be that much harder to heal if you have previous traumas. The other thing, it may not be trauma, but it might be that before the trauma occurs, there's a sense of being overwhelmed. You're spilling over. You can barely, be standing, and then you get flattened by the most recent trauma and having a hard time getting back up. The other thing that we're going to talk about a little bit more as a theme, along with resiliency, is attachment. And really, it's the biggest armor we can have, is having that sense of security, emotional security and safety and connection to somebody else. Often that occurs ideally in childhood, and then it becomes internalized, and we have that as a prototype for future relationships. But it is something that we can earn later on. So even if you didn't get it in childhood, we talk about earned security. It can be developed in later relationships, later in life. The next point, I have a few stars of what comes after the event. So post-trauma, what's the response? Are you coming into a sense where you're going to be able to ground and land safely, where you're going to feel that sense of connection and somebody who can help regulate you if need be? Or can you learn to regulate yourself? Can you pay attention to the present moment and be aware that the threat has abated? So there's many ways that you can do that, but it's often involved with the connection to somebody else, that real soothing and grounding that someone else provides. So that's where therapy and different services like that really play a role. So on to resilience. This is the direction that we want to go in. We want to have the trauma, but it's only through trauma or stress that we develop this resiliency. And it's also known, the term of post-traumatic growth, because we find strength that we didn't have. And ideally, we want to microdose little amounts of stress throughout our life so that we can build that resiliency. So this leads me into the myths about resilience. So I'm going to bust some of them. The first one is that resilience is an inborn trait. You either have it or you don't. And this is simply not true. It is a skill. It's something that can be taught. It's something that can be developed through experienced and encouraged. So I like that hopefulness. As well, resilient people don't feel pain. Not true. They get knocked down. They are completely vulnerable as well. They are not bulletproof. They just happen to be able to experience that pain. They don't have the same defenses that are going to get in their way of healing. And as a result, if they can feel sad or feel the fear or feel the anger, then they can recognize what they need and ask for the support that they need. And that brings to the third point, which is they can ask for help. The opposite of resiliency is trying to do it independently and autonomously. It is not a weakness to ask for help. In fact, it's a strength. And that's where you can be recognized and get the support that you need. So resilient people feel the pain, they ask for help, they feel their feelings, and they just get back up a little faster if you look at the timing in terms of that they respond and recover from. So those are the myths. But I'm going to move on to the next slide, what are the three components to resilience? So we're looking at resiliency on 3 levels. And the first is social supports. All 3 of these really tie in with each other. They're really interconnected. And that's why gatherings like this are so important, because social supports from communities and families and people around you have a great impact. I go back to the early attachment, but the stuff that comes later is equally as important in turning things around when they go off base or off track. So the second one is the cognition, how we think about things, our perspective, our outlook. One of the key traits of resiliency is optimism. The idea of, there is some hope. And that's really important. And if we can't find it, we need somebody to hold the hope for us. The other part is flexibility. So when a door closes, being able to go, oh, well, what about over here? Or if I look at it from this angle. So mental flexibility, emotional flexibility, problem solving, a sense of agency, being able to say, okay, you know what? I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure this out. I can make this happen with, maybe bring a team of people on, but I'm going to make this happen. And when we talk to, older people who have the wisdom, who've lived through a lot and demonstrate resiliency, what we refer to resiliency, one of the main qualities is engagement with life. And it really ties as well into social supports, because those that are engaged with life are connected to communities, have meaning and purpose. They have hobbies or passions that really connect them to life. So those are the things that get you out of bed and get one foot in front of the other. The next level is the biological level. And this is our brains and our nervous systems and our ability to regulate and calm ourselves. This is how quickly, if you knock me down, how quickly am I going to be able to get back up again and regulate my system, how rapidly we can return to baseline. And by microdosing stress throughout our lifetime, we can start to train ourselves to regulate quicker. Our original experience with emotional regulation should come in our attachment relationship, because we know that children don't have the ability to regulate themselves. So their parents are their prosthetic regulators and soothe them. And eventually that experience becomes internalized and they can start to learn to do that for themselves. And as adults, we can start to do that through things like mindfulness and being present and using our breath and paying attention to sources of tension in our body. That's why the mindfulness piece and breath really plays a key role in our ability to calm and self-soothe. And then our next slide, yeah. So I've talked a lot about attachment in children and really being the foundation for the beginnings of resilience. I know a lot in this crowd have children in their lives. And so I've referenced a longitudinal study that followed a group of children out of the University of Minnesota from infancy to adulthood. And in following them, she found, the psychologist who was studying them found that there were two groups that really showed resiliency. The ones that really early on, from early childhood, showed resiliency in terms of their regulation and their social abilities and their emotional and cognitive in school. They were just on track right from the start. And when she scratched the surface, she found in their families, there was at least one secure attachment with a parent figure or a caregiver. So that was their immunity. And not all of us have that. So I really was hopeful and excited by her second group, which are the late bloomers, she called them. They're those that might have been off the beaten path. They weren't showing those signs, but later in their, middle childhood to adolescence, connected with key adults and mentors later in life, coaches, teachers, significant adults. So we can see, we talk about this theme tonight of connectedness and community. It really is about the connection that really helps regulate us and develops that resilience. Going back to how we're doing in this pandemic, oh, I forgot. I was supposed to ask you as part of the chat to maybe, if you invite you anyways, to list what your coping mechanisms have been throughout this pandemic. So if you'd like to share, I welcome you to put that on the chat. And it's something that our people here can gather that information and maybe we can share it back. But as adults going through this pandemic and having younger people watch us, the awareness, even when we're completely flooded with what we're dealing with, the awareness that we are modeling how to respond to adversity, and that there are children watching how we react and calm ourselves. That's really, really, really important, because you don't think they are, but they are watching. And that's how they're learning. And they may be learning it, ideally they're learning how to do it in a responsive way and a regulated way and a resilient way. But you know what, as long as probably about 30% of the time we're bang on, I think we're doing okay. But they are watching. And even as a parent of young adults, I'm aware of it and I'm noticing they are watching. So watch out, pay attention. And then I'm going to finish with some good news. It's not surprising to hear that the more supported we feel, the more resilient we feel. We've talked about social supports, but what I really love was this finding that the reverse holds true. That the more we give support to others, the more resilient we become. So if everyone wants to go out and become therapists, we're going to have mass resiliency. No, I'm just joking. I think that we're all, if we have the ability, meaning we have our masks on ourselves and we have the charge in ourselves to support others, do it. Because it not only benefits others, it actually boosts our own resilience. So if you're looking after your parents or your children or friends, if you're able to offer that support or volunteer, a well-known finding is that people who volunteer have greater mental health and well-being. So do it. And that's what we're doing here right now. So in terms of our well-being, giving support is just as good as receiving support for positive mental health. And I know that soon we're going to be going into breakout and socializing. If you got the energy, give it. And if you need the energy, take it. And I thank you for joining and supporting this cause. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Rochelle. Just so a timely message, I think, for all of us to hear, right? And the adjustments we're all making in our own lives. And also so pertinent in how you framed really the challenge of the work that we do at YW in supporting the clients that we serve day in, day out. Because often what we know in their stories, they haven't had, right, that person, that social supports. And that's in fact how we step in. And so it is now time for questions. Enough listening. We want questions. And there are a couple of ways that we can do this. You can actually write in the chat if there are questions, or you can put your hand up and we'll actually give you the mic to ask your question. We're going to see how this goes for the next 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to break everyone out into little rooms. So you can literally have a cocktail with a smaller group. And you'll also have the ability to bounce around rooms to visit. So we'll kind of imagine that we're living in virtual reality here, that we can move through a house, Carol Ann's house, and we'll just go visiting in different rooms. But, and we continue also just to do some polling. And we'll kind of feed some of that stuff back, I think, through some of the breakout rooms. But we're really curious what you have heard this evening so far. What does it make you think? And what are you curious about? Bring on the questions. I believe that's Karen Radford, first out of the gate. I just want to pull it up again. And I think actually, Dr. Rochelle, for you, what is the best way to model recovery and discuss the process with adult kids during the lows?
I think, you know, if you're feeling in that moment, feeling really clouded and overwhelmed, I think saying it out loud and saying so that they know they're not just watching. If you're aware that they are going to be watching, saying, wow, this is really big and I'm not sure, I'm feeling, you know, either really big or scared or whatever's going on right now. And then showing them how you're going to ground yourself. So whether it's say, okay, I'm going to take a little walk right now, or I'm going to have a little breath, or I'm going to have a little cry, or whatever it might be, but really demonstrating sort of like a step-by-step of how you would recognize and label the feeling, and then know what the need is. So if it's that you're feeling really sad, that you need some comfort, and that you're going to do some comforting thing for yourself, or go and ask for what you need, and then take action to do it. And if it's fear, to do something in relation to fear, what you're going to do instead to create safety for yourself. And so you're going to say it and label it, and then describe the need, and then act it.
That's great. Modeling. Carolyn Hyde, you had a question. You put your hand up. Can we unmute? There you
Yes.
go.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I also just typed it, but I've recently heard of a couple different families who either have people in their families or close friends who have members who are struggling with different things. Some are elderly people, some are teenagers, and not specifically to do with the pandemic, but they have some issues that they need to work out. And they all seem to be wondering where a good place to start to find the right professional to talk to. And I'm wondering if what the resource in Calgary is where they should start.
You know, that's a really good question, because what I get that question posed to me a lot. People coming to me going, okay, I know you've been specializing working with teenage girls and young adult women and their families. I know of an adult or a boy or whatever it might be. And they really need a good therapist. And where do we turn, and what kind of therapist? And what always surprises me is how little awareness people really have about therapy. We can talk about mental health and awareness about the actual the issues or symptoms, but we don't really know what the menu is in terms of help. So I'm always surprised, but also, you know, okay, let's go into this. It's, you know, who prescribes meds? What's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? And how long does it take? Do I have to see a psychiatrist to get medications? And how do I find, if it's a family doc that can do that, which family docs? And, you know, if it's a phobia, who do I see for phobias? And what's the difference between CBT and EMDR and all these different types of approaches? And I wish I could say that there was one stop shop. I think there are some options, and there are, you know, if you look at Alberta, you know, mental health resources, you can find something. But what I find a lot of the times is people are looking for that touch, that contact with somebody that knows somebody, you know, to refer on. And I think that is something that we need to develop. I think that's really our next phase for mental health. Is we've started the talk, we've increased the awareness, we've reduced the stigma, but now what do we do with this? Let's walk the talk now. And so to answer your question, Carolyn, I think that there are more services and sort of triaging to lead people where they need to go, whether it's subsidized counseling or whether it's private. But I still think we're a long ways from really, you know, I really like a vetted therapist based on somebody that I know their work, you know, or you know, read their bio based on their trainings. And I have a bit of a guesswork myself, being a therapist looking into that, so I can really relate to how hard it is for families to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Rochelle.
And I would also add, and we're often not known for the counseling programs that we do available to everybody, right? Often people will think that YW counseling are for those sort of fleeing domestic violence. Not true. We actually have one of the most sophisticated practices, right? Grounded in mindfulness and dialectic behavioral therapy. And so it's also, and the way to reach through that on our website is our kind of 24/7 line. That also our clients and our on-call people are masters at connecting also to other partners in the community. So this is something too, needing your help to get the word out, that we can actually help facilitate and do some of that triage.
Mm-hmm.
Jay Roworth, I don't know the first name, Ms. Roworth. I see two of you in the window though. You have a question. What do we do about preteens? How do we help them or enhance their resiliency? What would you think, Rochelle?
I think there's a great opportunity with these preteens, because they're just about to go into that next brain development phase that's been unprecedented since they were like toddlers. It's like that big mass explosion. And they're starting as well, you're getting them before they start to really venture out, and you don't really have their full attention when they start really, you know, having mobility to get out of the house and out of your, so that's a really beautiful time. It can be a challenging time, but I think that the number one thing is recognizing that we're now going to get that emotional flare up like you kind of do in the terrible twos, that dysregulation. And so it's really important for the parents or the adults in their lives to really stay that grounded regulator and to welcome all emotions and to really, help them label it, help them, dig through it and without doing it for them, but really being supportive and welcoming of that and working through it with them. Does that answer the question?
That's great. Thank you. Linda Vinderskov, your question: what recommendations do you have to speak to loved ones when we think that this could last for years, right? We've been in it already sort of 3 to 4 months and maybe looking at, right, another 2 years, right? So how do we support each other, particularly our youngins and our elderly? And that's really relevant. We've got a 20-year-old living with us whose plans just completely disappeared for the summer, and he's lost.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with our kids and going into that uncertainty. And, I think that the advice that I have been talking to my kids about is control what you can control, right? And don't get caught up in all that uncertainty. You're going to do the best you can with what you have right in front of you, and know that's all you are what you have control of. The rest of it, you don't. And that's a hard thing for adults to deal with, never mind kids. When you talk about seniors, that's a whole other piece because their time really is closing in. And when you talk about years, that's a really, really sad thing to think about. But I think that we're getting better during these past 4 months at figuring out ways to make things happen, to adapt to whatever the circumstances. For example, tonight is an example. It's not a replacement for the real thing, but it certainly is a way that we can start to adapt. These are things we can control. When we can't control that we can't get there in person, this is something that we can. So that's the best that I can say in that really general, from babies to seniors, how we can adapt.
Is there anyone else who wants to comment on that or have another lens or view? Raise your hand. We'll tap you. We're going to stay quiet. Terry Allen, good to see you on this call. You have a question, concerned about a friend, it looks like, who you think is struggling with isolation and not connecting with people. What's our advice?
Is this person connecting with you?
I would say avoiding.
Avoiding, okay.
Yeah. Go for a dog walk. Oh, I can't now. What about next week? Let's try for that. So the putting off, a really outstanding human being. I just have a sense, and I have a little bit of a suspicion about one other as well. That sort of avoidance or the putting off or the, you could do a phone call if you didn't want to do a walk, but, it's not translating into other options. It's like I'm getting myself organized, dealing with work or whatever, and pushing that connecting out. And I'm hearing it from a couple of other mutual friends as well in the first instance.
And, it sounds like that's their defense, their coping mechanism, which is really hard because the more you push into a defense, the more it's going to, create a fortress around you. So maybe finding a way to soften the defense by saying, in a really gentle way, and this person of maybe how to approach it, but to say it looks to me like, you're keeping yourself safe by avoiding and not going in. What's it like for you right now? Are you feeling really alone? Are you feeling scared? Just sort of giving them the words, because often when people are avoidant, they're all deal and no feel. they're fearful of their own emotions. And so really being able to gently, and if you find that defense coming up, there's no point in ever pushing against it. You kind of have to gently try to, respect it and soften it, and maybe find another way around it. So I'd keep trying. I wouldn't fight against it, but I would definitely reflect back what you're seeing, that I really want to get in. And it seems like
actually raise it and say, I'm concerned. How are you doing? Anything I can do? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to move us on kind of to get us into maybe some smaller groups, less cumbersome with so many of us. Carol Ann, do you want to kind of help us with this shift and change, and just any sort of closing remarks to the whole group before we break out and have some girl talk?
Absolutely. Rochelle, thank you so much for that. I was writing like mad here. I've got all my notes. Thank you. So in closing, well, here we are. It's what we're talking about. We're here. We've got a world now with a pandemic, and as Albertans, we were already in an economic crisis. And when people are hit with economic challenges, we know that domestic violence goes up, and everybody's stress goes up as a result. And so when the pandemic hit, I knew that it was time to relaunch the Girls Gathering and to support the YW and the programs that they have. There's been a huge spike in mental health. We've all seen that on the news, and we feel it as well. It's very real for all of us. And but what I know is that there are going to be challenges. Governments will likely be strained for resources, and businesses like the YW will be impacted. So they will need long-term funding, and this, what we're doing here is what I deeply believe in, and that is the collective, and it's bringing people together, bringing women together, in order to support one another, and for everyone to do what it is that they can to support support one another. And we can all play a part in that, and in helping those that are the most vulnerable of all of us. And so if you're in a position that you can donate to the YW, please do. And there is also a monthly donation for $10 a month, and you can opt in and opt out as you wish. And that is a way that they can continue to plan for their programs and make sure that they've got the resources that they need. I guess ultimately, I just want to thank you all for joining tonight, being part of the village, being part of this group of women that gathers together with purpose. And I want to thank Dr. Rochelle again for speaking, and Jan, to you as well for speaking tonight. And as far as the Girls Gathering, we're back now, and we're here to stay. The next time we'll be in person, we'll be clinking glasses, and we'll be deepening our relationships again. So thank you again. I want to just say thank you to the YW for donating the She Said books. And so for the first 40 women that did donate, I've got a copy of the She Said book for you, which I will deliver, or you can pick up, whatever is, whichever you would like. And we're going to do a Google shot with all of us in the frame. on someone's computer. And so I can have all of these little miniature heads, which I would really like to have, all of your little mini heads. And I just want to say, I love the fact I see that daughters are joining in on this. It's so important. You know, it is inclusive, and so that it really warms my heart. And I also just want to say thank you to my dear friend Carolyn Hyde, that over the years, from the beginning, she's been such a great support and has done, she's a graphic designer. She's helped with doing invitations, and she's always been super helpful. So I just want to say thank you to her as well. So we are going to break into the smaller chat rooms. So if you have time and you'd like to join in and have some conversations with smaller groups, I'd love for you to join us. And I also just want to say, you know, I send big love out to all of you. I've seen many of my family members in here, which makes me so happy as well. But big love to you and your families. And we'll see you in the chat rooms.
Yeah. But before we do that, Sue, Tommy, would you help me thank Carol-Ann for pulling this off?
Yes, please. Thank you, Jan. Carol-Ann, you know, we talk at the YW that how tough this has been, and we sort of describe ourselves as being on the edge of our emotions. You know, we all sort of feel that way. And I have to say, when I hear you speak and what you've done for the YW and just what you've just said in terms of gathering support for this organization, it puts me on the edge of my emotions. So thank you for that. It means a lot to us. It's been tricky for this organization. It's tricky as leaders to be the resilient type and keep a brave face and try to do that. And when I hear you speak on our behalf, it means so much to me and to the team at the YW. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the beginning at your conversation, talking about the area of greatest need. As Jan said, for us right now, you know, we're worried about our people. We're worried about our frontline folks. And that wasn't necessarily what we needed right at the beginning. At the beginning, it was more PP&E and those types of things, and that has shifted. And so when you say to us, give, and they'll make the decisions, you have no idea how grateful we are for that, because things move, they change, and you trusting us to make that call and be able to actually do that as quickly as possible and be able to help our team, to help the women and families, really means so much to us. So I appreciate that, and everyone who's here for your support and your trust in this organization to help the community. And it's been really fun seeing everybody's face. I said, it's for those of us old enough, it's like romper room. So I see Roxanne, but you really see them, right? So I always find these as a giggle when you talked about that. So thank you to everyone, and thank you for your leadership again, Carol-Ann. It's good to see you all. Everybody be safe.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. And from the bottom of my heart too, Carol-Ann. Just love you to bits. Thank you for this and your leadership.